For the record, and because the Institute's Internal Review Board has requested a full account, I will explain precisely how Mara Solis came to be the individual who saved Verinda's exchange station during the Accord review, and why her clearance level at the time of the intervention was listed as recreational. I am responsible for that classification. I signed it myself. My name is Vethris Orn. I have served as Junior Science Compliance Attaché to the Varen Institute for 11 years. My function is intake assessment, reviewing the credentials of incoming exchange candidates, assigning laboratory access tiers, and ensuring that the Institute's research environment is populated by personnel whose qualifications justify the access they granted. I am good at this work. I have never, prior to the events described here, filed an assessment that required subsequent revision. I want that noted. The human exchange cohort for the Verinda's rotation consisted of 6 individuals. 5 arrived with documentation I found straightforward to evaluate, 2 materials analysts, 1 atmospheric engineer, 1 xenobiochemist, and 1 propulsion systems consultant, all holding credentials from recognized institutions and all assigned to appropriate access tiers without difficulty. The 6th was Mara Solis. Her application listed her occupation as General Repair and Maintenance Technician. Her prior experience included 9 years servicing industrial equipment at a processing facility, for years as a field technician on a remote survey contract, and an apparently unrelated period of what she described as independent study in manual systems architecture. She held no formal research credentials. She listed no experimental focus. When asked on the intake form to describe her primary scientific interest, she wrote, "I like knowing how things fit together." I reviewed this documentation for approximately 3 minutes before assigning her category null, recreational clearance only. This meant access to the station's common areas, the observation decks, the archive terminals, and the disused Workshop 7 on sublevel 4, which the Institute maintains for visiting personnel who want a space to pursue non-research activities during off-rotation hours. It is where we keep old components that are no longer in active use. I filed the paperwork, transmitted the access credentials to her station terminal, and moved on to other work. She arrived on a Tuesday. I met her briefly during orientation, a quiet human woman, early 30s by their reckoning, with a particular quality of stillness that I have since come to understand means she is paying attention to everything. She asked no questions during the orientation briefing. She thanked me for the access package. She found her quarters without assistance and was, as far as I was aware for the first several days, entirely unremarkable. On the 3rd day of the rotation, one of the Institute's senior researchers, Orvek Than, who leads the Composite Materials Division and who has never been described as a man of either patience or subtlety, stopped me in the corridor near the lower research decks and told me, with some amusement, that the human in Workshop 7 had been there since the 5th hour of the morning shift, taking apart a Keth series conduit relay that had been sitting in the parts bin for approximately 6 years. "She's cataloguing the components by hand," he said, "writing them down in a physical log." I said this seemed consistent with her clearance category. He laughed. Orvek Than does not laugh often. He seemed to find the image of a human sitting cross-legged on the floor of Workshop 7, writing things in a physical log, genuinely entertaining. He mentioned it at the Research Division's evening briefing. By the following morning, the phrase "the recreational human" had entered common usage among the science staff. I did not discourage this. I should be direct about that. I found it mildly amusing myself, in the way that one finds a thing amusing when it confirms a judgment one has already made. She had no research credentials. She had been assigned recreational clearance. The fact that she was spending her exchange rotation taking apart obsolete conduit relays in a disused workshop seemed to support, rather than complicate, my initial assessment. I said so, once, when Orvek Than made a joke about it during a team briefing. That was the last time I offered that opinion aloud. I am not proud of this. I want that noted as well. Over the next 2.5 weeks, Mara Solis worked her way through most of what was in Workshop 7. She repaired 3 conduit relays that had been out of service long enough that no one remembered what they had originally connected to. She rebuilt a pressure regulation housing that had been removed from the station's secondary atmospheric loop during a renovation 4 years prior. She mapped, by hand, in that physical log, the complete junction architecture of Workshop 7's wall panel interfaces, which includes several auxiliary access points that were installed when the station was constructed and which have not appeared in any updated schematic since the last major systems integration in the station's 14th year. None of us knew that. I should be honest about this. None of us knew that Workshop 7's wall panels still connected to those auxiliary junctions, because no one had reason to look, and because the ORAS system, the station's optimal research automation suite, which manages all active experiment environments and laboratory access protocols, had been handling systems integration autonomously for long enough that the question of what connected to what, manually, had not come up. AURAS is an impressive system. The Varen Institute commissioned its installation as part of a broader initiative to reduce the administrative load on research staff, allowing scientists to focus on research rather than systems management. It monitors and adjusts atmospheric conditions in all 16 active laboratory bays, manages access protocols for 247 pieces of certified equipment, coordinates the scheduling of 7 shared experimental spaces, and generates compliance documentation for the Institute's participation in 12 active research accords. It does all of this without requiring any direct staff intervention. We were proud of it. The Accord review was scheduled for the 22nd day of the rotation. Directorate observers, 3 of them, senior classification officers from the Central Research Accords body, arrived the previous evening and were given a tour of the station's active research environments. Everything was in order. The demonstration was scheduled to proceed through 4 of the Institute's 6 active projects, beginning at the 9th hour of the morning shift. AURAS initiated the demonstration sequence at 9 hours exactly. The access protocols for Laboratory Bay 3 opened, the atmospheric conditioning systems adjusted to the appropriate parameters, and Orvek Than began his presentation to the Directorate observers. At 9 hours and 14 minutes, AURAS flagged a scheduling conflict. The nature of the conflict was technical and, in retrospect, entirely predictable to anyone who had examined the system's parameter architecture with any care. The short version is this. The demonstration schedule required Laboratory Bay 3's atmospheric systems to be in research demonstration mode at the same time that ORAS had scheduled a routine calibration cycle for the station's primary atmospheric management array. These 2 requirements were not, in themselves, incompatible. However, ORAS's conflict resolution protocols, when presented with 2 simultaneously active priority designations, defaulted to a lockout state while it attempted to resolve the conflict through its standard hierarchy. The standard hierarchy required confirmation from a certified systems administrator. There was no certified systems administrator currently logged into the ORAS terminal. The on-duty administrator had stepped away from the terminal at 9 hours and 12 minutes to retrieve a calibration document from the adjacent office. AURAS locked every laboratory bay on the station, all 16 of them, simultaneously, including the 4 bays where the Directorate observers were expecting a demonstration to take place. The on-duty administrator returned to the terminal at 9 hours and 17 minutes and attempted to enter his credentials. AURAS, now in full lockout mode, required a supervisory override in addition to standard credentials. The supervisory override required the station director's biometric confirmation. The station director was, at that moment, standing in Laboratory Bay 3 with the Directorate observers, which was now locked. We could communicate with her through the bay's intercom. We could not open the door. I will not describe the next several minutes in detail. They are not, professionally speaking, among the most distinguished of my career. What I will say is that the Institute systems team, 4 of them, working at the central ORAS terminal with the administrator, were unable to find a manual override pathway through the system's software architecture in the time available, because ORAS's lockout protocol had been designed to prevent an authorized override, and had done so with notable thoroughness. At 9 hours and 31 minutes, Mara Solis walked into the central systems corridor. She was carrying her physical log and a small case of hand tools. She had, as I later learned, been in Workshop 7 when the lockout alarm sounded, heard the alarm, checked the station intercom for a status report, heard the status report, and then walked upstairs. She did not ask permission. I want to note that as well. She simply walked in, looked at the systems team around the ORAS terminal, and said, in the particular flat tone she used for most statements, "Which bays do you need open first?" There was a pause. The 4 systems engineers looked at her. The on-duty administrator looked at her. I looked at her. No one, in that pause, seemed to have a ready answer to the question, partly because it implied a capability none of us had credited her with, and partly because it was the first useful question anyone had asked in the previous 17 minutes. Orvek Than, who was standing near the terminal, said later that he had started to explain that the system was in full lockout and that there was no manual pathway. He said he got approximately 8 words into this explanation before she opened her log to a page near the middle and showed him the junction map she had drawn in Workshop 7 on the 6th day of the rotation. The auxiliary access junctions in Workshop 7's wall panels connect through a conduit run that was installed when the station was first constructed and has not been removed or disconnected in all the years since, to the manual override architecture of the station's original access control system. That original system is still present. It is still connected. It has simply not been used in a very long time because ORS handles everything. ORS, notably, was not currently handling everything. She went to Workshop 7, opened the wall panel she had already catalogued, located the junction she needed, and began working her way through the station's manual override architecture one bay at a time, in the order that the systems team told her through the intercom. Laboratory Bay 3 was the first one open. The station director emerged, confirmed her credentials at the ORAS terminal, and the system began its restart sequence. Total elapsed time from lockout to full restart, 41 minutes. The Directorate observers witnessed approximately the first 20 minutes of Mara Solis's work through the corridor's observation window. I do not know exactly what they said to each other during those 20 minutes. I was not standing close enough. The expressions on their faces suggested that the conversation was substantive. The demonstration proceeded, delayed by 41 minutes. Orvek Than gave his presentation with the particular energy of a man who has just watched something that he will be thinking about for a long time. The Directorate observers were attentive. The review concluded without further incident. At the 14th hour of that same afternoon, I submitted the revised clearance documentation for Mara Solis. I upgraded her classification from Category Null, Recreational Clearance, to Category 1, Full Systems Access, with a commendation note attached. This was the first commendation note I have attached to a revised clearance filing in 11 years of practice. The commendation note was, if I'm being honest, the easiest part of the paperwork to write. The more difficult document was the internal report explaining why a human technician with no formal research credentials and a recreational clearance had been the individual responsible for restoring station access during a Directorate review. This report is the document that the Institute's Internal Review Board has now requested. I have been writing it, in various forms, for the past several days. This account is my attempt at a version that is both accurate and complete. The Review Board will note, because it is in the record and cannot be omitted, that Mara Solis's clearance level at the time of her intervention was recreational. It was recreational because I classified it that way. She has since been offered a permanent consulting position with the Institute's Systems Integrity Division. She accepted, on the condition that she be given access to Workshop 7, which she said she had not finished yet. I reviewed her new credentials myself. I was, I think, somewhat more thorough this time. The physical log is now in the Institute Systems Archive. The junction maps she drew in it, by hand, in Workshop 7, over the course of 2.5 weeks, have been incorporated into the station's updated schematic documentation. They are more detailed than anything in the previous schematics. She drew them, as far as I can determine, because she found it interesting to know how things fit together. I have been thinking about that, about what it means to find something interesting enough to map it carefully, in a physical log, before anyone has told you it might matter. I have not arrived at a conclusion I am fully satisfied with, but I have been thinking about it. For the record, that is everything.